This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christie Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Our guest today is author and writing guru Loren Stephens. She is a widely published essayist, as well as a writer of fiction and nonfiction. Her most recent book is All Sorrows Can Be Borne. It's a story inspired by the true life events of her mother-in-law. Loren is a two-time nominee of the prestigious Pushcart Prize, as well as president and founder of the ghostwriting companies Write Wisdom and Bright Star Memoirs, where she helps other writers pursue their dreams. But even more than that, Loren is a master pivoter who early on in her career dealt with the realization that passions don't pay bills. After careers in finance, fundraising, and documentary films, Loren found her way back to her first dream. It's a story that takes her across the country to follow her then ex-husband for co-parenting and finding a way to make it all work. Welcome to The Balanced Dilemma, Loren.
Thank you. Good morning, Maura and Christie. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Wonderful to talk to you.
So, Loren, let's circle back to the very beginning. You went to college, and when you were in college, you wanted to become a writer. Your father put a lot of pressure on you to go to law school, and you fought him on that and didn't follow that trend. And you ended up in a career of finance, which I think follows your quote, passions don't pay bills. Was it important to you to make money and be able to support yourself?
It was extremely important. I was married at the time. I didn't have a child, although that was definitely in the formula of what I saw as being a fulfilling and happy life. And I serendipitously was approached by a mortgage banking president who was interested in my writing skills and hired me to write the offering memoranda for the deals that they were putting together. So I took my writing chops, as it were, that I had honed at Cornell as an undergraduate in English with a minor in government, and wrote these brochures that were presented to potential banks and pension funds, other lenders for our projects.
Now, to be fair, Loren, you did get a master's in international affairs beforehand.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, I did. And what I intended to do with it, I wasn't really sure. But I saw that as sort of an escape route from the pressure of going to law school.
Now, can I ask you, may I ask you about law school? Because you are talking to two lawyers. And while we won't be insulted, right, being a lawyer does involve a lot of writing. And as a litigator, it involves storytelling. So it almost would have been a somewhat natural fit.
It could have been, but I am not a person that looks for adversarial situations. As the eldest daughter, I think I'm a get-along person, and I didn't see myself as being in the courtroom, being in an adversarial position. And frankly, I didn't like the thought of another 3 years of school after finishing my BA. Two more years at Columbia in the School of International Affairs was more than enough. Plus, I was offered a fellowship, and so I was able to pay my own way. I have to admit that my parents could have footed the bill, but they were of the mind that, they had done enough for me, and now it was my turn to sort of, put on my big boy pants, as it were, and, pay my own way. So I saw that as kind of a compromise situation, which is something that I operate inside of in my world, being a compromiser, trying to find that middle ground that hopefully, satisfies more than one value.
So you went on, you used your writing, launched a career in finance through document writing. You were married, and then you had a child.
I was married, and 5 years after we were married, we had a son, a little boy, and shortly thereafter, my husband lost his job. The part of the company that he was the head of closed down quite unexpectedly without warning. And he made the decision that he was going to become a theater producer, and who was going to be his first backer? You're looking at her, as it were, or you're speaking to her.
And that must have been quite a shock. So, marriages can be difficult to negotiate. That one sounded like it had pretty strict terms. How did you feel about that?
It had extremely strict terms, and I didn't know how long that would go on before, he was self-supporting. It went on for as long as I would allow it. And when I finally sort of said, I'm done, I can't do this anymore, work full-time, support the family, the mortgage, the nanny, all of the sort of all of the things that it requires to sort of keep things afloat, he announced to me that he was going to divorce me.
Okay, before we get to the divorce, Loren, talk about what it was like being the family breadwinner, because this was at a time when it was very uncommon for women to be the family breadwinner. It was a two-sided situation. I was extremely proud of myself. I was promoted to senior vice president of the mortgage banking firm. I found that I was very good at putting deals together. I trained other credit analysts to do what I had started doing. And the money was quite amazing. If I closed a deal, I not only got my salary, but a huge bonus. I liked the idea of, packing my briefcase and traveling across country and speaking to high-level individuals. And I really took to it like a fish to water. At the same time, I felt extremely resentful. I wanted to feel like it was a choice, not a necessity. And I think that's sort of the catch-22. I wanted to feel that this is something I was choosing to do, not something I had to do. And you could say that was kind of bratty.
And did that happen at some point, that you felt a pressure, like there was no out, you had to do this because you had all these obligations?
Absolutely. It was either that or collect unemployment insurance, because my husband was not making any money at the time. It was all going out the door.
Loren, what was it like being a mother and fitting in with the other mothers or other parents?
I really didn't have much traffic with other parents. I had a nanny who took care of my little boy, and we're speaking of a time when he was between infancy and 3 years old, which is when my husband left. He went to pre-K nursery school. Weekends, I was on duty full-time, and I always felt guilty. I mean, that was the underlying emotion, guilt. Was I shortchanging my child? He didn't choose to come into this world. I wanted to be a parent, but I didn't feel like I was being a good enough parent. I was traveling a tremendous amount, and, many times I'd pick up the phone and call home, and the nanny would be there, and I'd, have to bite my lip not to start crying.
So the guilt...
My husband wasn't around very much because he was traveling so much for his production.
And the guilt
Broadway and out.
Loren, the guilt that you were referring to, that's mommy guilt for not being the one doing the things that the nanny was helping with?
Exactly. And I also felt like I was missing out on, my son's first steps, missing out on his first words. It was a very hard place to be, but I didn't feel that I had a choice, frankly. Maybe I did, maybe if I were really honest, there was an aspect of being someone who wanted a career, someone who wanted the prestige of having a job that very few women at that time had, functioning in a man's world. I didn't have a lot of images of satisfied women.
Okay, Loren, we're going to take a break right now. We're going to come back and talk about that. You're listening to The Balance Dilemma. We're speaking with author and writer guru, Loren Stephens.
Loren, so you had this identity as this, Wonder Woman. You were working, married, had a child, and that all ended when your husband walked out the door when your son was 3 years old. And you moved to a new role, truly being a single parent without having a husband to stand by and help at all with the struggles. Whether he was helping before or not, we could discuss, but it sounds like you were really having to do it alone. Tell us an example of one of your worst days during this phase and how you handled it.
I think one of my worst days was shortly after my son was born, and I think it was 4 to 6 weeks after he was born. I was sent to New Orleans to meet with a potential client, and I broke down in tears just because I was so far away from my little boy, and my husband, we were still married at the time, had gone off to California. So the house was empty of parents, and I just felt horribly guilty and didn't know if I could really continue doing this.
So earlier, before you actually became divorced, there were situations where there wasn't an agreement that one parent would be home. It sounds like your husband just pursued his own ambitions regardless of schedules. Is that what was going on?
Definitely. One time, he and I ended up on a flight together to Philadelphia, and we didn't even know that we were on the same plane.
We often talk about the concept of lead parent, and it sounds like you were the lead parent whether or not you were there.
Definitely. And I would say probably that's true in most families, even today. It seems that the lead role does fall on the woman.
I'm just curious because your parents wanted you to be financially independent. How did they feel about the role that you had taken on? Were they proud, or did they think you were crazy or something else?
By that time, my father had passed away, and my mother was she was on the Loren team and felt that my husband was not carrying his share of the burden. So she was extremely resentful of him and fueled the flame, as it were.
So you get divorced, and in what I think some might call an unusual move, after he left, you moved cross country to be near him. I mean, many people want to be away from their exes, and you moved cross country to be near him. Tell us about that.
We were living in Boston at the time, and he had moved to Los Angeles to become a literary agent and to pursue his dreams in the entertainment industry, which he did and became extremely successful. I had one too many freezing cold winters in Boston. I had been out to California and sort of drank the Kool-Aid, saw the beautiful palm trees and what have you. And most importantly, I felt that it was very important for my son to have a father and to be near his father. What he would end up thinking of his father would be his decision. And so that became my number one priority, was that my son and my ex-husband have a relationship.
That sounds like a hugely, huge example of selflessness that you did for your son. What did other people think of your big move? Did they support it, or did they think you were just doing another crazy thing? What feedback did you get?
They My mother was of the opinion that only crazy people live in California. That the earth gets tipped and all the crazies end up rolling to the West Coast. And she also resented not being able to see her grandson. My son was the first grandchild of that his generation, and she absolutely adored him and felt that I was taking him away from her. So I didn't get a lot of support, no.
But it ended up being a good choice for you and your son, right?
Definitely. They have a wonderful relationship. My ex-husband remarried and has a daughter, and my son and this daughter are extremely close. So he has the sibling he didn't have or that I couldn't give him.
So this move out west, while you stayed in the banking business, it ultimately led you to more career pivots.
Definitely. I moved to Los Angeles, took a job in corporate development with a big SEC corporation in the medical field. And then I started to really follow my path. I produced documentary films and theater, all of which was the underpinning was my ability to raise money and to create limited partnerships. And so people started coming to me and asking me if I could help them come up with the money that it was, that was needed. So that was sort of...
I'm curious, was this a matter of you saying yes to opportunities or creating new ones for yourself?
I think it was a combination. I mean, underneath it all, my passion was writing and was to be in a creative line of work. The whole finance thing was sort of a coat of many colors that I wore for many, many years, but it wasn't really who I was. And so I started taking baby steps toward moving back into what really was my passion.
Now, most people don't think of the world of the arts as, an area where money matters per se, or business acumen matters, but it sounds like your background gave you the perfect fodder for producing and creating material with the unartistic side of knowing how money works.
Exactly. And, so I sort of melded the two businesses. It's very interesting, and thank you for pointing that out. I hadn't really thought about it, but yes, absolutely.
So I want to go back to this concept of lead parent. You'd been lead parent all along. How did things change when you moved to California? How did your ex factor into raising your son when you were both in the same state in a new town?
When it fit his schedule. Is the short answer.
Let me ask you, would he say the same thing? Would he acknowledge that?
He was building his career. He was ending up producing movies of the week for a major studio. It was an extremely demanding job, and he would take my son to business meetings, this little kid. And he made sure that my son fit into his schedule. And I would say, if he was being honest, that I would remain the lead parent, and he was the Disneyland parent, or the weekend parent, or the when it suited him parent.
The job we'd all like to be. And we're going to take a break. Loren, thank you. This is The Balanced Dilemma, and we're here with Loren Stephens.
You're listening to The Balanced Dilemma. We are speaking with Loren Stephens.
So, Loren, have you ever asked your son what he would say about this concept of who was the lead parent? And maybe you don't use that phrase. Maybe you say, what was your perception of how Dad factored into your upbringing? Did you ever have a discussion with him about that?
Not really. My son is an extremely private person. And what went on in his father's home stayed in his home. The expression, what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas. he would not come back and tell me very much about what was going on. What I did see is temper tantrums. The whole experience of separation was very hard to navigate. When he'd leave me, he probably acted out at his father's house, and when he'd leave his father, he acted out with me. But he would rarely talk about how his dad treated him, how his dad's girlfriends treated him, how his dad's new wife treated him. It was a pretty off-limits discussion.
Pretty stressful for kids to go through that. So now we want to get to the business side of things.
Yeah, you wrote an article somewhere around 2005, 2006, which was a reaction to a New York Times article about young, talented, ambitious women who plan to one day be stay-at-home mothers. The article, and it'll be in our show notes, is called "Many Women at Elite Colleges Set a Career Path to Motherhood." And you particularly took issue with this one person featured in it, a Cynthia Liu, who was a Yale college student who intended to go to law school and then become a mother. You wrote a piece called
Nantucket Sleigh Ride.
Thank you, Christie. Can you talk to us about, first of all, why this got under your skin and you felt you had to write about it?
Well, let me just read Loren's words, and then she could tell us what she meant about this. Now I read in the New York Times that Cynthia Liu, a sophomore at Yale, plans to go to law school, work for a few years, and then expects to be a stay-at-home mom. When did smart women decide that being a wife, mother, and businesswoman was undesirable, if not downright inappropriate? Tell us what was going through your head when you put this piece together.
I really wrote it as a cautionary tale. Nantucket Sleigh Ride comes from, it's a metaphor, where the fishermen go out, they harpoon the whale, and they hold on to the ropes until the whale finally is so exhausted that they can drag them into shore, and then they butcher them. It's a pretty macabre example, and probably describes a little bit of what my own mindset was at the time. But I was really a bit shocked that a young woman with obvious, tremendous abilities would see herself giving up all the training and the career path that she had set herself on to stay at home. I wondered why she didn't try to sort of come up with some sort of a balance between the two. And I pointed out to her that there's no guarantee that Mr. Moneybags is going to be around to, help her navigate the waters,
and that's really
continue that metaphor.
Right, that's what you really meant by the metaphor. And you use phrases in this article that your career was the bedrock of your identity. And you also talk about when your husband lost his job and the feeling of instability, and your 15 years as a single mother. And it seems that in this piece, you were talking about the insecurity that comes with marriage. And although your personal situation was divorce, we've had statistics on this show that talk about your partner could be disabled, can pass away. There's all sorts of things. So this piece really, as you said, is a cautionary tale to Cynthia that it's not always, roses.
On the other hand, you yourself experienced the struggle of trying to juggle it all. Now, this particular woman hadn't even gotten to the struggle yet. But do you understand the women who tried and couldn't pull it off? And at about the same time, early 2000s, there were articles about how women were unable to make it work. They were finding it impossible to juggle family and career. Did you understand that, even though you managed to pull it off?
Well, I did pull it off up to a point. And yes, of course, I understand it. It's just that I'm asking Cynthia to think about some kind of a middle ground, the compromise again of what could she do. Could she get a part-time job in the legal field, doing something that would keep one foot in that world, so when her children were old enough, she could go back to work. full-time, point out that she never really fully left it. In my own case, I ended up, I wasn't diagnosed, but I ended up having a nervous breakdown at some point and having to see a therapist. I call him Dr. Birkenstock because he used to wear those Birkenstock shoes, and I would visit him. And
I think everyone in California did then.
Those are hot shoes right now. I'm sorry, I had to weigh in on the fashion.
That's my image of businessmen on the West Coast. But you are right. It wasn't just that. It seemed that she had a plan in her mind, and that's the point of the article. And the articles that Maura is referencing, there was the opt-out generation once back in, which was written in 2013 as a response to a Lisa Belkin article maybe a decade earlier, where she profiled women like Ms. Liu who had given up, a Tony degree and a job for a perfect life as they saw it of homemaker and supporting the children. And then when you fast forward after the 2008 crash, many of the women had to work because their husbands lost their jobs. And so it's a real mixed bag, and that's all part of the things, what we discuss here on the show.
Do you think anything has really changed since then?
I think women have a lot more opportunities. And they have the ability to be more creative about how they're going to make it all work. But I think the notion of the lead parent has not changed. I think that women do bear the lion's share of caregiving. I also think that there is a sea change in terms of maybe deciding not to have children, which was a far less accepted decision. I think today there are women who just, for many different reasons, do not want to be a mother, either because they are so invested in their career, they see the world in such turmoil, they don't want to bring children into this world. And speaking on behalf of the men listening, I think that men have become somewhat more accepting of the notion of taking on some responsibility. I certainly hope that my son, when and if he does get married, will step up to the plate, having a mother, such as me.
So sitting in the catbird seat and looking back in time, is there something that you might say to your younger self that you might have done differently? Or do you think the way you did it was a good recipe, even though it had some broken eggs along the way?
I think I would have said, can you sit down with your husband and really try to come up with a plan that works for both of you? Communication is so critically important. I mean, both of us were operating from the seat of our pants. And I don't think that we tried to come up with some sort of a plan. I mean, you're talking about two very smart people who were just fumbling along. And we did try to see a therapist at one point. I don't know if you know the name Dr. David Viscott. He was sort of the psychologist du jour in Boston. And he basically claimed our marriage over. It was really interesting. Psychologists don't usually do that.
Loren, let me just ask you very quickly. Do you think that a couple can have two equal, inflexible, unpredictable careers at the same time while raising children?
That's a great question. I think that's part of the reality check, that if they do, I think they're really in for that Nantucket sleigh ride.
And on that, we're going to take a break. You're listening to The Balanced Dilemma. We're speaking with Loren Stephens. But before we get back to Loren, Christie, can you tell us where our listeners can find us?
Sure, Maura. The Balanced Dilemma can be found at thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can listen to old episodes and sign up for our newsletter, find show announcements, show notes, resources, and further reading. Follow us, rate us, share us on social media at at The Balanced Dilemma Podcast on Facebook and LinkedIn. Podcast episodes are also available for listening on Apple iTunes, Google, and Spotify. Please rate us and share us.
Loren, for someone who said passions don't pay bills, you somehow managed to turn your passion into a business. Tell us about that.
There was a little episode that I skipped in my sort of career history. I worked for 15 years for the Anti-Defamation League as the head fundraiser for the Pacific Southwest region. And during that time, I met some absolutely amazing people and built quite a network for myself here in Los Angeles. When my mother passed away and I was left a little bit of money, I felt I had a sufficient cushion to start a new business. I had, over a period of time, written her memoir while I was still working in fundraising. And I loved doing that. I loved interviewing her. I loved writing her book. She loved having a book. She put it on her coffee table, and everyone who came into her house read it. And I suddenly realized that this could be a business. It's one of those serendipitous moments, you know, where you say to yourself, wow, I wonder if other people would want me to do this for them.
And Loren, you did find through all the people that you met at ADL that everyone sort of had a story, or there were a lot of people who wanted to write?
Absolutely. My sort of basic slogan is everyone has a story to tell.
I agree with you.
So when I made this decision to pivot, my first clients were some of my most generous donors, and I had a built-in client base, and I just went from there. So, you know, beginning in 2005, when I started Write Wisdom, to today, our company has written over 45 books for our author clients in all different fields. Some are CEOs, some are Holocaust survivors, some are entrepreneurs. It just runs the whole gamut of activities. Some are lawyers.
I have a question. Many of our listeners like to hear about businesses, and they might have an idea that they want to turn into a business and they don't even know where to start. It sounds like you had a background writing offering plans in the financial sector, so you got to see something go from an idea into an actual business. Did you rely upon those skills? What steps did you take to take this passion and this little cushion that you had and turn it into a business? Did you make an offering plan, set a budget? Tell us about that.
I didn't do any of that.
Love it.
I'm sorry to.
And you were still a success. Did you listen to or read any books on the subject? What? How did you lay this out?
What I did is I took classes in writing. I mean, I knew I was a good writer, but UCLA is right around the corner. I took a class in writing the personal essay with a brilliant teacher, who I then studied with for something upwards of 15 years. And that was really my preparatory work. And then, of course, I went to conferences and I networked with other writers. And I also hooked up with a ghostwriting company that acts as an agent to submit a request for proposal for potential book projects. And that was a huge help in building my business beyond sort of just the word of mouth that I had relied upon. The other thing, and this I recommend to absolutely everyone who's thinking about going into a business that is their passion, is hire a PR firm. Hire a company that's going to get your name out there, whether through social media, through radio podcasts such as yours, through television interviews, and that becomes the critical mass that brings you customers.
And did you have customers right from the get-go, or did you...
From the get-go. Absolutely from the get-go. I had my mother's memoir as sort of a sample. Here's the kind of book that you can write. There's nothing like being able to open a book, read a page, touch it, see a beautiful cover. At that point, I was producing the books myself. I don't do that anymore. I leave that to other experts. But it was a tantalizing calling card. Instead of a business card, I had this book.
Did you keep your day job while you did this, or were you all in?
In the beginning, I did. I also recommend that. Don't jump in with both feet first. Try and do small projects that you can do on the weekends at 4 a.m. in the morning when you're writing. Don't cut the umbilical cord till you feel you're ready. And also, as I said, I had the cushion of some money that my mother had left me, and I don't take that for granted. That's a huge help.
How long did you keep your day job until you decided to quit to pursue this full time?
2 years, till I felt really ready that I had a business that I had tested. I sort of did beta testing, right. And I realized that, yes, this was a business. And, of course, my pricing structure, I started off very modestly. Today, ghostwriters can make a lot of money, and I've been extremely fortunate.
Loren, along the way, you remarried, and you have written a novel based on your new mother-in-law's life story, and it's called All Sorrows Can Be Borne. Can you tell us a little about the story?
Yes, but first I would like to say, be careful when you marry a writer, because whatever happens in your life becomes fodder for a book.
Duly noted.
Yes. So my husband was born in Japan. He came to the United States at the age of 2.5. His parents could not take care of him. He was put on an airplane by himself and picked up at the airport in San Francisco by his father's sister and her Japanese-American husband, and driven to Glendive, Montana, in the middle of the Badlands, and this is where he grew up. He and I met at the Anti-Defamation League. He was actually working for me at the time. He's 17 years my junior. We could write a long book about that at some other time. And I was always fascinated and curious about the idea of a mother giving up her little boy. How could this have happened? How could a mother do this? And you see that this question sort of resonates with my own life.
I was thinking that.
Yes. And so I went to Japan, and I interviewed his birth mother. I took his adoptive mother with me because she speaks both English and Japanese. So I had my two mothers-in-law together, and I interviewed actually both of them. I did several years of research. My mother-in-law in Japan was born at the time of Hiroshima. That's where she lived. She saw the bombing. That is part of the story. Yes, so what came out of all of this was All Sorrows Can Be Borne. It was published in 2021 by Rare Bird, which is a small independent boutique press here in Los Angeles. It's about to come out in paperback after 2 years.
Loren,
and
on the book, did you come to understand why your husband's mother, Derrico, did what she did, even when she had the opportunity to change her mind and reverse it?
You know, she was convinced that giving up this beautiful child would somehow save her husband. And it turned out not to be the case. But this is the Kool-Aid that she drank. And it's not entirely unknown or not customary that sometimes Japanese families do give up a child. for financial reasons or health reasons or whatever, perhaps more so than here in this country.
Could you see this as another example of passions, because she was in love with her child, but passions don't pay the rent, that she had to support herself and her husband somehow?
She was, yes.
It's a sacrifice.
It's another sacrifice.
So it was a complete sacrifice, yes.
And that brings us to what I see as the through line in our discussion with you, in delaying your personal passions until later in life, because you had to make the money and support your son.
But I would say there is an expression, it gets greater later. I wonder how you feel about that.
That it gets greater later?
And it's never too late.
It is never too late. I think that if people use that as an excuse, they are selling themselves short. There's always an opportunity to follow your passion, whatever it is, at whatever time. You just have to create your own little nest. You know, you're like a bird.
So, Loren, before we run out of time, can you answer this for me? Can you have it all and all at the same time?
You definitely cannot have it all at the same time.
Well,
I think you can have it all. I think you can have it all sequentially.
Well, there you have it. And that wraps it up for us. Loren Stephens, thank you so much. The book is All Sorrows Can Be Borne. We'll put your websites in our show notes. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Maura.
And I'm Christie Derrico.